The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's bar like bullets against armor plating. Inside, the dim lighting cast long shadows across weathered faces and battle-scarred hands wrapped around beer bottles. This wasn't just any watering hole, it was the unofficial headquarters for retired Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and other Special Forces veterans who found solace in each other's company. Commander Jake Morrison sat at the far end of the bar, his steel-gray eyes scanning the room with the practiced awareness of someone who'd spent 25 years in the world's most dangerous places. At 52, he still carried himself with the rigid posture and commanding presence that had made him a legend among the SEAL teams. His reputation preceded him wherever he went: 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and more classified missions than most people had hot dinners. The bar buzzed with the usual conversations about old deployments, fallen brothers, and the struggle to adjust to civilian life. These men had seen things that would break ordinary people, done things that kept them awake at night, and carried secrets that would go with them to their graves. They understood each other in ways that outsiders never could. The heavy wooden door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air and the sound of rain. A figure stepped inside, shaking water from a dark hooded jacket. The newcomer was small in stature, moving with a fluid grace that suggested military training, but something seemed off to the seasoned veterans in the room. The person kept the hood up, face hidden in shadow, and chose a seat at the opposite end of the bar from where Morrison and his crew had claimed their territory. "Another wannabe," muttered Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez, a former Green Beret whose scarred hands told the story of too many close calls with improvised explosive devices. He'd lost 3 fingers on his left hand during a mission in Afghanistan, and the remaining digits drummed impatiently on the bar top. Probably some kid who thinks wearing military surplus makes them special. Chief Petty Officer Mike Tank Thompson nodded in agreement, his massive frame straining against his flannel shirt. At 6'4" and 250 pounds of solid muscle, Tank had earned his nickname by being the human equivalent of an armored vehicle during beach assaults. His voice carried the authority of someone who'd led men through hell and brought them home alive. Put up inside, sitting alone, trying to look mysterious. "I've seen this act before." The hooded figure ordered a whiskey neat, speaking in a low voice that didn't carry across the room. The bartender, Old Pete, was a Vietnam veteran himself who'd seen every type come through his doors over the past 30 years. He served the drink without comment, but his experienced eyes lingered on the stranger for a moment longer than usual. Morrison found himself studying the newcomer with professional interest. Something about the person's posture triggered his tactical instincts. The way they sat with their back partially to the wall, maintaining clear sight lines to both exits. The casual placement of hands that suggested easy access to concealed weapons. These weren't the movements of a civilian playing dress-up. "Maybe we should introduce ourselves," suggested Staff Sergeant Lisa Chen, one of the few women in their regular group. She'd served as a combat medic with Army Special Operations and had saved more lives than she could count. Her petite frame belied the fact that she could carry a 200-pound soldier across a battlefield under enemy fire. "Find out what their story is." Morrison held up a hand to stop her. "Let them drink in peace for now. If they want to join the conversation, they will." His instincts told him there was more to this situation than met the eye, but he'd learned long ago that patience often revealed more than aggressive interrogation. The bar's atmosphere remained tense as the veterans continued their conversations in lower tones, occasionally glancing toward the hooded figure. The stranger seemed oblivious to the attention, nursing the whiskey and staring straight ahead at the mirror behind the bar. Every so often, Pete would catch their eye and nod, receiving a subtle acknowledgement in return. As the evening wore on, more veterans filtered in from the storm. Each newcomer noticed the hooded stranger and exchanged glances with the regulars. The unspoken question hung in the air: who was this person, and what were they doing in a place reserved for those who'd earned their stripes in combat? The tension finally reached a breaking point when a new arrival stumbled through the door. Corporal Danny Walsh was drunk before he'd even arrived, his words slurred and his movements unsteady. Walsh had been struggling with his demons since returning from his 4th deployment to Iraq, and tonight seemed to be one of his worst nights. "What do we have here?" Walsh announced loudly, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the hooded figure. "Some kind of ninja wannabe?" His voice carried the bitter edge of someone who'd seen too much and lost too many friends. The Purple Heart recipient had taken shrapnel in his leg and shoulder during a roadside bomb attack that killed 2 of his squad mates, and he'd never quite recovered from the survivor's guilt. The hooded figure didn't react, continuing to stare at their reflection in the mirror. This only seemed to inflame Walsh further. He pushed away from his own barstool and took several unsteady steps toward the stranger. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Walsh continued, his voice rising above the ambient noise of the bar. "You think you're some kind of operator? You think wearing that hood makes you special?" The pain in his voice was evident to everyone present. This wasn't really about the stranger, but about Walsh's own internal battles. Morrison stood up from his position, ready to intervene before things got out of hand. He'd seen too many good men destroy themselves with alcohol and misplaced anger to let this situation escalate. But before he could move, something unexpected happened. The hooded figure slowly turned on their barstool to face Walsh. Even with the hood still up, there was something commanding about the movement. When they spoke, their voice was calm and steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'm just here for a drink, soldier. No trouble intended." The voice carried an authority that made several veterans straighten unconsciously. There was something familiar about the tone, the cadence, the way certain words were emphasized. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Walsh, however, was too far gone to recognize the warning signs. "Don't you soldier me," he snarled, taking another step closer. "You want to play dress up? You want to pretend you know what it's like?" His hands clenched into fists as years of suppressed rage bubbled to the surface. The other veterans watched in silence, torn between loyalty to their troubled brother and a growing sense that something significant was about to happen. The air in the room seemed to thicken with anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. Old Pete reached for the baseball bat he kept behind the bar, but the hooded figure raised a hand slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both authority and reassurance. "It's okay, Pete," they said quietly. "Sometimes people need to talk." Morrison found himself moving closer despite his earlier decision to stay back. His tactical instincts were screaming that this situation was about to change dramatically, and not in the way anyone expected. The stranger's body language suggested someone accustomed to command, someone who'd faced down much more dangerous situations than a drunk veteran in a neighborhood bar. "You know what your problem is?" Walsh continued, swaying slightly as he pointed an accusing finger. "People like you think you can waltz in here and pretend to understand what we've been through. You think wearing the right clothes and acting tough makes you one of us." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Every person in that bar had earned their place through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. They'd lost friends, taken lives, and carried scars both visible and invisible. The idea that someone might be trivializing their experience struck at the heart of everything they held sacred. But, instead of responding with anger or defensiveness, the hooded figure did something that caught everyone off guard. They laughed, not mockingly, but with a sound that carried years of shared understanding and hard-won wisdom. "You're right about one thing," the stranger said, their voice carrying across the now silent bar. "Clothes don't make you an operator. Neither does talking tough or trying to prove something to people who've already proven everything they need to prove." The response was so unexpected, so perfectly calibrated to diffuse the situation while simultaneously commanding respect, that Walsh actually took a step back. For the first time since entering the bar, he seemed to truly see the person he was confronting rather than just projecting his own pain onto a convenient target. Morrison felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to click into place in his mind. The voice, the bearing, the way this person commanded attention without raising their voice or making threats, it all pointed towards someone with significant experience in leadership and combat situations. But there was something else, something that nagged at the edge of his consciousness like a half-remembered dream. The stranger continued speaking, and, with each word, the atmosphere in the room continued to shift. "I've been where you are, feeling like the world doesn't understand, like the people around you can't possibly comprehend what you've seen and done. It's a lonely place, and alcohol only makes it lonelier." These weren't the words of someone pretending to understand, they carried the weight of personal experience. Walsh's anger began to drain away, replaced by confusion and something that might have been hope. But, here's what I've learned, the figure continued, the brotherhood doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It doesn't matter where you serve or what your specialty was. What matters is that you served with honor and that you look out for each other when the mission is over. The speech had the desired effect on Walsh, whose aggressive posture melted into something closer to shame. But it also had an unexpected effect on Morrison and the other veterans present. The words carried an authority that went beyond experience. They carried the weight of someone who'd not only served but led others through the darkest moments of their lives. As the stranger spoke, Morrison caught a glimpse of something that made his breath catch in his throat. A small section of what looked like a tattoo was visible just below the hood line on the person's neck. It was only a partial view, but what he could see sent shock waves through his memory. The tattoo appeared to be military in nature, precise, detailed, and carrying the kind of symbolism that spoke to specific units and achievements. But, more than that, something about the particular design triggered a memory that Morrison had buried deep in his classified mental files. Old Pete, sensing the shift in the room's energy, quietly moved the baseball bat back to its resting place. His veteran's instincts told him that whatever was happening here was bigger than a simple bar fight. The other patrons seemed to sense it too, as conversations died away and attention focused entirely on the exchange at the bar. Walsh, his anger completely deflated, looked around the room as if seeing it clearly for the first time that evening. I'm sorry, he mumbled, both to the stranger and to his fellow veterans. It's just, some days are harder than others, you know? The hooded figure nodded with understanding. We all have those days. The trick is not facing them alone. They gestured toward the other veterans in the room. Look around you. You're surrounded by people who understand exactly what you're going through. Don't let pride keep you from accepting their help. It was then that Morrison made a decision that would change everything. His curiosity had reached a breaking point, and his instincts were telling him that this conversation was about to become one of the most significant moments of his post-military career. He approached the bar, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Commander Jake Morrison, United States Navy, retired." He extended his hand toward the stranger, a gesture that was both polite and challenging. The hooded figure turned to face him fully for the first time. Even with the hood still up, Morrison could see enough of their face to recognize the bearing of someone who'd held significant responsibility. The stranger extended their own hand, and Morrison was surprised by the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of extensive weapons training. "Pleasure to meet you, Commander," the stranger replied. "I've heard your name mentioned in certain circles." The response sent another chill through Morrison's spine. The phrasing suggested knowledge of classified operations, the kind of information that wasn't freely shared outside very specific military communities. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to place this person in his extensive mental database of special operations personnel. "And you are?" Morrison pressed, his tone remaining polite but firm. The stranger seemed to consider the question for a long moment, as if weighing the consequences of revelation. The entire bar held its breath, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. Finally, the figure spoke. "Someone who's spent a lot of time in the same places you have, Commander. Someone who understands the weight of the decisions you've had to make." The answer was simultaneously revealing and evasive, the kind of response that Morrison had heard from intelligence operatives and special mission personnel. But there was something else in the tone, something that suggested a personal connection to his own service record. As Morrison studied the stranger more closely, trying to piece together the clues, he became aware that every other veteran in the bar was watching this exchange with rapt attention. They all sensed that something significant was happening, even if they couldn't yet understand what it was. The moment stretched on, tension building like pressure in a boiler. Morrison's tactical mind was working overtime, processing every detail of the stranger's appearance, voice, and mannerisms. Somewhere in the back of his consciousness, pieces were beginning to align in a pattern that would soon become impossible to ignore. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Murphy's bar, a different kind of storm was building, one that would challenge everything these veterans thought they knew about service, sacrifice, and the true meaning of brotherhood. Morrison's eyes narrowed as he studied the stranger more intently. 25 years of combat experience had taught him to read people like tactical maps, and every instinct he possessed was telling him that this person represented something far more significant than a casual visitor to Murphy's bar. The way they held themselves, the precise economy of their movements, the authority in their voice, these weren't traits that could be faked or learned from movies. "You seem to know a lot about my background," Morrison said carefully, his tone carrying the edge of someone accustomed to dealing with classified information. "That's interesting, considering we've never met." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over what he could see of the stranger's face beneath the hood. "At least, I don't think we have." The hooded figure smiled, not the practiced expression of someone trying to deflect attention, but the genuine article that spoke of shared understanding between professionals. "Memory can be a funny thing, Commander. Sometimes we remember faces better than names, sometimes it's the other way around. And sometimes," they continued, their voice dropping slightly, "we remember actions more clearly than either." The cryptic response sent Morrison's mind racing through decades of missions, operations, and encounters with other military personnel. There was something tantalizingly familiar about this person, but the memory remained just out of reach, like trying to grasp smoke with his bare hands. Chief Petty Officer Thompson had been listening to the exchange with growing interest. His massive frame cast a shadow over the stranger as he approached from the other side. "If you know the commander here," Tank said in his rumbling voice, "then you might know some of the rest of us too. This isn't exactly a random collection of weekend warriors." The stranger turned to acknowledge Thompson, and Morrison caught another glimpse of that partial tattoo. This time, he saw enough to make his pulse quicken. The design included what appeared to be a trident, the symbol of the Navy SEALs, but there were additional elements that suggested specialization beyond standard SEAL operations. His mind immediately went to the most elite units, the ones that operated so far off the books that their existence was barely acknowledged even within the military. "Tank Thompson," the stranger said with obvious recognition. "Breacher specialist, assault team leader, and the only man I ever saw carry a wounded teammate 3 miles through hostile territory without stopping for rest." The casual recitation of Thompson's classified service record hit the room like a thunderbolt. "How's that shoulder holding up? I heard you took some shrapnel during the Kandahar extraction." Thompson's face went white. The operation the stranger was referencing wasn't just classified, it was so black that even most special operations personnel had never heard of it. Only a handful of people outside the direct participants knew the details of what had happened that night in Afghanistan, and most of them were dead. Morrison felt the final pieces of the puzzle beginning to click into place. The voice, the knowledge, the bearing, it was all starting to form a picture that defied belief. His hand unconsciously moved toward his chest, where beneath his shirt lay a scar that had been carved there by one of the most classified operations of his career. "Staff Sergeant Chen," the stranger continued, turning toward the diminutive medic who had been watching the exchange with growing amazement. "Still carrying that lucky charm your grandmother gave you? The one that stopped the bullet meant for Lieutenant Hawkins during the embassy evacuation in Yemen?" Chen's hand flew involuntarily to her pocket, where she indeed kept a small jade pendant that had saved her life and that of her commanding officer 3 years earlier. The incident had never been officially reported, buried in the kind of operational security that kept good people alive and bad people in the dark. The room had gone completely silent. Every veteran present understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The stranger wasn't just demonstrating knowledge of classified operations, they were revealing intimate details of personal moments that had never been officially recorded, the kinds of details that could only come from someone who had been there. Morrison's tactical mind was working overtime, processing possibilities and rejecting them one by one. The person sitting at the bar couldn't be who he was beginning to suspect they were. That individual was supposed to be dead, killed in action during a mission so classified that even the obituary had been fabricated. But the evidence was mounting with each passing moment. "Rodriguez," the stranger said, addressing the former Green Beret whose scarred hand had been drumming nervously on the bar. "Still having nightmares about the cave complex? The one where you had to choose between saving the intel and saving your team?" The question was asked gently, with the understanding of someone who had faced impossible choices and lived with the consequences. Rodriguez's scarred face crumpled with emotion. That mission had haunted him for years, the memory of being forced to make a decision that would either compromise national security or cost lives. He'd chosen his team, and the intelligence had been lost in the explosion that followed. The official report had classified the mission as a success, but Rodriguez had never forgiven himself for the potential consequences of his choice. "How do you know about that?" Rodriguez whispered, his voice barely audible above the rain still hammering against the windows. That was eyes only. The after-action report was sealed at the highest levels. The stranger's response was to slowly reach up with both hands and lower the hood that had concealed their identity throughout the evening. As the fabric fell away, Morrison felt the world shift around him like the deck of a ship in heavy seas. The face revealed beneath the hood was one he had seen in photographs, in briefings, and in his dreams for the better part of 3 years. It was older than he remembered, marked by new lines and scars that spoke of experiences beyond anything in the official record. But there was no mistaking the intelligence in those eyes, the strength in that jawline, or the unmistakable bearing of someone who had commanded the respect of the most elite warriors in the world. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Phoenix Martinez sat before them, very much alive despite the fact that her death had been reported and mourned throughout the special operations community. The woman who had led more successful deep-cover missions than any operative in modern military history, who had been awarded decorations that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, and who had supposedly died in a helicopter crash over the mountains of Pakistan. Morrison's legs nearly gave out beneath him. Phoenix Martinez wasn't just a legend in special operations circles, she was the legend. Her tactical brilliance and leadership under impossible conditions had made her a ghost story that new operators whispered about during training. She had been the first woman to successfully complete the most elite special operations courses, had led mixed-gender teams into situations that would have broken lesser warriors, and had earned the grudging respect of men who had thought women had no place in combat. The tattoo that Morrison had glimpsed was now fully visible on her neck, an intricate design that incorporated the Navy SEAL Trident, Army Special Forces Arrowhead, Air Force Wings, and Marine Corps Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. But, at the center of it all was a phoenix rising from flames, surrounded by dates and coordinates that marked the sites of her most significant operations. It was a work of art that told the story of a career that had transcended traditional service boundaries. Phoenix, Morrison breathed, using the call sign that had struck fear into enemy hearts and inspired confidence in Allied forces across 3 continents. "We thought you were dead. The crash, the funeral. I was at Arlington when they folded the flag." Phoenix Martinez smiled with the weariness of someone who had carried too many secrets for too long. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Commander. Though there were times during the past 3 years when I wished they weren't." Her voice carried pain that went beyond physical injuries, the kind of soul-deep exhaustion that came from operations that pushed human endurance beyond its breaking point. The revelation sent shock waves through every person in the bar. Phoenix Martinez wasn't just another special operations veteran, she was a living legend whose supposed death had marked the end of an era in military special operations. Her missions had been the stuff of whispered conversations in secure facilities, operations so sensitive that they existed only in the deepest classified files. Tank Thompson was the first to find his voice. "The helicopter crash over the Hindu Kush, we all thought." He couldn't finish the sentence, overwhelmed by the implications of what he was seeing. "The crash was real," Phoenix confirmed, her fingers unconsciously tracing a scar along her left temple. "But I wasn't on that helicopter when it went down. I was 50 miles away, completing a mission that required the world to believe I was dead." She paused, her eyes distant as if seeing ghosts from the past. "Sometimes deep cover requires the ultimate sacrifice, your own identity." Morrison's mind raced through the implications. If Phoenix Martinez was alive, it meant that her last mission, whatever it had been, was either still ongoing or had concluded with ramifications so significant that maintaining the deception of her death was still necessary. The woman sitting before them wasn't just a returning hero, she was a walking, breathing classified operation. 3 years, Staff Sergeant Chen said softly, her medical training making her notice the signs of long-term stress and trauma that marked Phoenix's features. 3 years of everyone believing you were gone. Do you have any idea what that did to the community? To morale? You were the proof that the system could work, that merit mattered more than politics. Phoenix's expression grew somber. I know exactly what it cost. I've read every after-action report, every psychological evaluation, every resignation letter from female operators who felt like they'd lost their champion. Her voice carried the weight of personal responsibility for consequences she'd never intended. But the mission required that sacrifice. Not just from me, but from everyone who believed I was gone. The acknowledgement of collective sacrifice hit the room like a physical blow. These veterans understood the concept of necessary losses, but learning that one of their most respected leaders had been forced to sacrifice not just her life but her legacy was almost too much to process. Rodriguez leaned forward, his scarred hands gripping his beer bottle so tightly that his knuckles showed white. What mission could possibly be worth that kind of cost? What objective could justify letting the entire special operations community think they'd lost one of their best? Phoenix's eyes hardened with the look of someone who had seen things that couldn't be unseen. The kind of mission that doesn't make it into history books, Sergeant. The kind that prevents wars instead of winning them. The kind that keeps weapons of mass destruction out of the hands of people who would use them against innocent civilians. The cryptic response was classic Phoenix Martinez, revealing just enough information to convey the significance of the situation while maintaining operational security that had been drilled into her since her first day in special operations. But, for the veterans in Murphy's Bar, it was enough to understand that they were in the presence of someone who had sacrificed everything for a cause they might never fully understand. Morrison found himself studying Phoenix's face more closely, noting the new scars and the way her eyes occasionally darted toward the exits, habits that suggested someone who had been living under deep cover for an extended period. Are you still operational? He asked carefully, using the kind of language that could be interpreted as innocent curiosity by anyone not familiar with military terminology. Phoenix's smile was answer enough, but she provided clarification anyway. Let's just say that my vacation is almost over, and I wanted to spend some time with people who understand the weight of the uniform before I disappear again. The admission sent a chill through the room. If Phoenix Martinez was preparing for another extended operation, it meant that whatever threat she'd been addressing for the past 3 years was either unresolved or had evolved into something even more dangerous. Old Pete, who had been quietly polishing glasses while listening to the exchange, finally spoke up. Ma'am, whatever you needed, food, shelter, a safe place to rest, it's yours. No questions asked. His offer was echoed by nods around the room, the instinctive response of warriors who recognized one of their own in need. Phoenix's eyes softened at the gesture. I appreciate that, Pete. More than you know. But, right now, all I need is what I came for, a chance to sit with people who understand the cost of service without having to explain or justify anything. The simple request struck at the heart of what Murphy's Bar represented for all of them. It was more than just a drinking establishment, it was a sanctuary where the weight of service could be shared without judgment, where scars both visible and invisible were understood without explanation. As the evening progressed, Phoenix began to share carefully edited stories of her experiences over the past 3 years. She spoke of operating in places that didn't officially exist, of preventing attacks that the public would never hear about, and of working with allies whose identities would remain forever classified. Each story was told with the practiced skill of someone who had learned to reveal truth without compromising security, to satisfy curiosity without endangering operations. The other veterans listened with rapt attention, understanding that they were being granted access to history that would never be written in any official record. Phoenix Martinez wasn't just sharing war stories, she was providing glimpses into a world of shadows and secrets that existed parallel to the conventional military they had known. But, beneath the professional respect and tactical admiration, there was something else building in the room, a growing awareness that Phoenix's return might not be the celebration they had initially imagined. The weight of her secrets, the cost of her sacrifices, and the isolation of her extended operation had left marks that went deeper than any physical wound. Morrison, with his experience in leadership and his understanding of the psychological toll of extended operations, began to recognize signs that troubled him deeply. Phoenix Martinez might be alive, but the question remained whether the person she had become during 3 years of living a lie could ever truly return to the community she had served so faithfully. The atmosphere in Murphy's Bar had transformed completely from the suspicious tension of earlier in the evening to something approaching reverence. Phoenix Martinez sat surrounded by some of the most decorated special operations veterans in the country, yet the dynamic felt less like a reunion and more like a confession. The weight of 3 years' worth of secrets hung in the air like smoke from a distant battlefield. Morrison studied Phoenix's face as she spoke, noting details that troubled his experienced eye. The hypervigilance was more pronounced than it should be in a secure environment surrounded by allies. Her hand position suggested constant readiness for violence, and her eyes never stayed fixed on one person for more than a few seconds before scanning the room for potential threats. These weren't the reflexes of someone on leave, these were the survival mechanisms of someone still deep in operational mode. "Tell us about the mission," Tank Thompson said bluntly, his massive frame leaning forward with interest. "I mean, whatever you can share. 3 years is a long time to be dead to the world." His directness was typical of his personality, but there was genuine concern beneath the gruff exterior. Phoenix's expression grew distant, as if she were looking through the walls of the bar into memories that existed in classified files and encrypted communications. "How much do you know about nuclear proliferation networks?" she asked, her voice taking on the clinical tone of someone briefing a tactical team. The question sent a chill through every veteran present. Nuclear threats represented the ultimate nightmare scenario for special operations forces, the kind of mission where failure meant consequences measured not in tactical defeats but in civilian casualties numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Rodriguez straightened in his seat, his scarred hand unconsciously moving to where his service pistol would normally rest. "Are we talking about state actors or independent networks?" His question revealed the kind of strategic thinking that had made him valuable in intelligence-gathering operations. "Both," Phoenix replied grimly. The mission began as a routine investigation into missing nuclear material from a decommissioned facility in Eastern Europe. What we discovered was a network that made the con-proliferation ring look like amateur hour. She paused, seeming to weigh how much classified information she could reveal. Picture an organization with cells on 6 continents, access to weapons-grade material, and the technical expertise to build devices that could level entire city blocks. Morrison felt his blood run cold. Abdul Qadir Khan's nuclear proliferation network had been one of the most dangerous threats to global security in modern history, responsible for spreading nuclear technology to countries like North Korea, Iran, and Libya. If Phoenix was suggesting they had uncovered something worse, the implications were staggering. Staff Sergeant Chen leaned forward, her medical background making her acutely aware of the humanitarian implications. "When you say you discovered this network, what exactly did that mean for your mission parameters?" Phoenix's smile was humorless. "It meant that a routine 6-month assignment became a 3-year deep cover operation to identify, infiltrate, and neutralize an organization that threatened the security of every major population center on the planet." She gestured toward her own appearance. "It also meant becoming someone else so completely that sometimes I forgot who I used to be." The admission revealed the psychological cost of extended deep cover operations. Maintaining a false identity for months or years required a level of psychological compartmentalization that few people could sustain without permanent damage to their sense of self. Phoenix Martinez hadn't just been presumed dead, she had been forced to kill her own identity to protect millions of lives. "The helicopter crash," Morrison said slowly, pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a complete picture. "That wasn't an accident or an attack. That was your exit strategy." Phoenix nodded grimly. "My handler and I realized that the only way to get deep enough into the network was if I had no official existence. No government connections, no traceable background, no support network that could be compromised." She traced the rim of her whiskey glass with one finger. "So Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez died in that crash, and someone else was born from the wreckage." The revelation struck every veteran present with the force of a physical blow. They all understood the concept of sacrifice for the greater good, but Phoenix had been asked to sacrifice something that went beyond life itself, her very identity and connection to everyone she had ever served with. Tank Thompson's voice was unusually quiet when he spoke. "Who did you become?" "Elena Kozlova," Phoenix replied, the name rolling off her tongue with the fluency of someone who had lived it for 3 years. "A former Spetsnaz operator turned arms dealer, with just enough verifiable background to pass deep scrutiny and just enough reputation for violence to gain entry into circles where nuclear material was treated like any other commodity. The creation of such an elaborate cover identity would have required resources and expertise that went far beyond normal military intelligence operations. It suggested involvement from the highest levels of government and intelligence agencies working in coordination across multiple countries. Rodriguez whistled softly. Spetsnaz reputation would open doors, but it would also put a target on your back. How did you survive 3 years in that world without backup? Phoenix's expression grew haunted. By becoming everything Elena Kozlova needed to be. By making decisions that Sarah Martinez never could have made. By doing things that will follow me for the rest of my life. She paused, her hands steady despite the weight of her words. The people in that network weren't just criminals, they were true believers convinced that nuclear weapons in the right hands could reshape global power structures. They didn't just sell death, they celebrated it. The psychological toll of maintaining such a deep cover identity was evident in every line of Phoenix's face. She had been forced not just to pretend to be someone else, but to actually become someone whose values and actions were fundamentally opposed to everything she had sworn to protect and defend. Morrison's leadership experience told him that Phoenix was struggling with more than just operational stress. "How much of Elena Kozlova is still with you?" he asked gently, recognizing the signs of someone battling with fractured identity. The question seemed to hit Phoenix harder than any of the others. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing glimpses of the psychological warfare she had been fighting within herself. "More than I'd like to admit," she said quietly. "When you spend 3 years making decisions that Elena would make, thinking thoughts that Elena would think, it becomes harder to remember where the character ends and you begin." The admission revealed the true cost of Phoenix's mission. She hadn't just sacrificed her official existence, she had been forced to compromise her very sense of self in ways that might never be fully healed. The psychological damage from extended deep cover operations was well documented, but rarely discussed outside of classified psychiatric evaluations. Old Pete, who had been quietly observing from behind the bar, poured another round of drinks without being asked. His weathered face showed the understanding of someone who had seen good soldiers destroyed by missions that asked too much of the human spirit. "What finally brought you out?" he asked. "After 3 years, what changed?" Phoenix accepted the fresh whiskey with a nod of thanks. "We got them all. Every cell, every supplier, every scientist who thought they could auction nuclear annihilation to the highest bidder." Her voice carried grim satisfaction. "The last facility was neutralized 2 weeks ago in a coordinated operation across 4 continents. 37 arrests, enough weapons-grade material to build a dozen bombs, and technical specifications that could have accelerated nuclear programs by decades." The scope of the operation was staggering. Coordinating simultaneous raids across multiple countries would have required unprecedented cooperation between intelligence agencies and special operations forces. The fact that Phoenix had been instrumental in identifying targets across such a wide network spoke to the depth of her infiltration and the value of the intelligence she had gathered. Chen looked troubled by the implications. "If the mission is complete, why do you look like someone who's still operational? You said your vacation was almost over." Phoenix's expression grew darker. "Because removing the network revealed something worse. We discovered that they weren't just independent actors, they were being funded and directed by a state sponsor with ambitions that make nuclear proliferation look like a side project." She met the eyes of each veteran in turn. "Elena Kozlova's reputation and connections are too valuable to waste. There's another mission waiting, and this time the stakes are even higher." Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. If Phoenix was being asked to return to deep cover for an even more dangerous mission, it meant that the threat they had uncovered went beyond anything the public could be allowed to know. The weight of global security was resting on the shoulders of someone who had already sacrificed everything. "What kind of state sponsor?" Rodriguez asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer wouldn't be one he wanted to hear. "The kind that views nuclear weapons as tools of political leverage rather than deterrence," Phoenix replied cryptically. "The kind that believes a few strategic detonations could reshape international power balances in their favor." The kind that has been using the proliferation network as a testing ground for techniques they plan to implement on a much larger scale. The implications were terrifying. If a nation-state was actively working to place nuclear weapons in the hands of terrorist organizations or rogue regimes, it represented a fundamental shift in the nature of global threats. Traditional deterrence theory broke down when dealing with actors who welcomed nuclear chaos as a means to achieve political objectives. Thompson's massive hands clenched into fists. So you're telling us that you spent 3 years uncovering one network, only to discover it was just the tip of an iceberg? Exactly, Phoenix confirmed. And the people who sent me on this mission are asking Elena Kozlova to go deeper, to identify the state actors and their ultimate objectives. Which means Sarah Martinez has to stay dead a little longer. The room fell silent as the full weight of Phoenix's situation became clear. She wasn't just a hero returning from a successful mission, she was a warrior trapped between identities, unable to reclaim her life because the world still needed Elena Kozlova more than it needed the truth about Sarah Martinez. Morrison found himself thinking about the psychological toll of what was being asked of Phoenix. Extended deep cover operations were among the most dangerous assignments in intelligence work, not because of the physical risks but because of what they did to the human mind and spirit. The fact that she was being asked to return to that world after 3 years suggested either desperate necessity or callous disregard for her well-being. What about support? Chen asked, her medical training making her concerned about the long-term effects of psychological isolation. Last time you were completely cut off from your real identity. Will they at least provide some kind of connection to who you really are? Phoenix shook her head. Elena Kozlova can't have connections to American intelligence. Any link that could be traced back would compromise not just the mission but every operation she's been involved with. The people we're hunting are sophisticated enough to follow threads across years of operational history. The answer revealed the true nightmare of Phoenix's situation. She wasn't just being asked to return to deep cover, she was being asked to dive even deeper into a world where Elena Kozlova's reputation would place her at the center of increasingly dangerous operations. Each success would make her more valuable to the criminal networks, but also more isolated from any possibility of rescue or support. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. How long this time? Another 3 years? 5? Or is this one of those indefinite assignments that ends when either the mission is complete or you don't come home? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Phoenix's silence was answer enough. This wasn't a mission with a defined timeline or clear exit strategy. Elena Kozlova would continue to exist for as long as she was useful, and Sarah Martinez would remain dead until that usefulness ended, one way or another. Morrison felt the weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders. Phoenix Martinez wasn't just a fellow veteran sharing war stories, she was a warrior being asked to sacrifice herself repeatedly for missions that the public would never know existed. The question was whether anyone had the right to ask that much of one person, regardless of the stakes involved. But, as he looked around the room at the faces of his fellow veterans, Morrison realized that they were all thinking the same thing. Phoenix Martinez had always been someone who accepted impossible missions and found ways to complete them. The fact that she was here, sharing this information with them, suggested she had already made her decision about the next assignment. The only question that remained was whether the person who returned from this mission would bear any resemblance to the legendary operator who had walked into Murphy's bar on a stormy night to say goodbye to the only family she had left. The storm outside Murphy's bar had begun to subside, but, inside, a different kind of tempest was building. Morrison stared at Phoenix Martinez, the woman who had supposedly died 3 years ago and who was now preparing to disappear again into a world of shadows and deception. The weight of her revelations hung heavy in the air, but there was something else, something in her eyes that suggested the story wasn't complete. There's more, isn't there? Morrison said quietly, his years of experience reading people telling him that Phoenix was still holding back crucial information. Something you haven't told us about why you're really here tonight. Phoenix's hands stilled on her whiskey glass. For the first time since revealing her identity, she looked genuinely uncertain, as if weighing whether to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. You're perceptive, Commander. But some truths are harder to share than others. The admission sent a ripple of tension through the assembled veterans. If Phoenix Martinez, someone who had just revealed one of the most classified operations in modern military history, was hesitating to share additional information, it meant they were approaching secrets that went even deeper than nuclear proliferation networks and state-sponsored terrorism. Staff Sergeant Chen leaned forward, her medical intuition telling her that Phoenix's reluctance was rooted in personal rather than operational concerns. "Whatever it is, you can trust us. We've all kept secrets that could get people killed. Whatever you're carrying, it doesn't have to be yours alone." Phoenix looked around the room at the faces of the veterans who had welcomed her despite her deception, who had listened to her story without judgment, and who were offering support despite the risks involved in simply knowing she was alive. "The truth is," she began slowly, "I didn't just come here to say goodbye before the next mission. I came here because I'm not sure I'm coming back from it." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Every veteran present understood the difference between dangerous missions and suicide missions, and Phoenix's tone suggested she was facing something closer to the latter. Tank Thompson's massive frame tensed. "What makes this one different? You've survived 3 years in the deepest cover imaginable. You've taken down networks that other operators couldn't even identify. What's changed?" Phoenix's smile was haunted. "Elena Kozlova's reputation has grown beyond what we originally planned. She's not just known in criminal circles anymore, she's become someone that the most dangerous people in the world actively seek out for their most sensitive operations. The next mission requires her to accept a contract that will put her at the center of something that could trigger the next world war." The revelation sent chills through every person present. If Phoenix was being asked to participate in operations that could destabilize global politics, it meant the stakes had escalated beyond anything they had previously imagined. Rodriguez's scarred hand gripped his beer bottle tightly. "What kind of contract?" "The kind that would make Elena Kozlova personally responsible for providing nuclear capability to a terrorist organization backed by a nation-state that wants plausible deniability for what comes next," Phoenix replied grimly. "The kind that would require her to personally oversee the transfer of weapons-grade material to people who plan to use it against civilian targets." Morrison felt the world shift around him as the full implications became clear. Phoenix wasn't just being asked to maintain her cover identity, she was being asked to become complicit in acts of mass murder in order to gather intelligence that might prevent even greater catastrophes. "They can't ask that of you," Chen said, her voice tight with emotion. "There have to be limits, even for deep cover operations. There have to be lines that don't get crossed." Phoenix's laugh was bitter. The lines disappeared the moment the first nuclear weapon went missing from that facility in Eastern Europe. When you're dealing with people who measure success in body counts numbered in the millions, traditional operational ethics become luxuries we can't afford. The moral complexity of Phoenix's situation was staggering. She was being asked to participate in planning actual terrorist attacks in order to gather intelligence that might prevent those attacks from succeeding. But the psychological cost of such participation, even in service of a greater good, would be devastating to anyone with a functioning conscience. Morrison's command experience told him that Phoenix had already made her decision, despite her apparent uncertainty. "You're going to do it, aren't you? You're going to accept the contract and hope you can find a way to stop whatever they're planning without blowing your cover." "I don't have a choice," Phoenix replied simply. "The alternative is letting them find someone else to facilitate the transfer, someone we can't monitor or influence. At least if Elena does it, we'll know when, where, and how. We'll have a chance to stop it." The logic was sound from a tactical perspective, but Morrison could see the personal cost it was extracting from Phoenix. She wasn't just accepting a dangerous mission, she was accepting the possibility that she might have to cross moral lines that could never be uncrossed. Old Pete, who had been quietly listening from behind the bar, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, with all due respect, there's got to be another way. Some missions are too costly, even when the stakes are high." Phoenix turned to face the older veteran, and, for a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked completely. "Pete, in the past 3 years, Elena Kozlova has been present when 17 different nuclear devices were discussed, planned, or partially constructed. She's provided intelligence that led to the prevention of attacks on New York, London, Tel Aviv, and Mumbai. How many millions of lives is one person's soul worth? The question cut to the heart of the moral dilemma facing Phoenix. She had already saved more lives than most people could comprehend, but the mission was asking her to risk becoming the very thing she had sworn to fight against. Thompson leaned forward, his voice gentle despite his intimidating appearance. But what happens to you when this is over? When Elena Kozlova has done whatever she needs to do to stop these attacks? How do you come back from that? Maybe I don't, Phoenix admitted quietly. Maybe Elena Kozlova is all that's left now. Maybe Sarah Martinez really did die in that helicopter crash, and everything since then has just been borrowed time. The admission revealed the true depth of Phoenix's psychological struggle. She wasn't just facing the possibility of death on the next mission, she was facing the possibility that the person she had been was already gone, consumed by the identity she had been forced to adopt. Morrison stood up slowly, his mind working through possibilities that he didn't want to consider. Phoenix, listen to me. You came here tonight not just to say goodbye, but because you needed to remember who you really are. You needed to be around people who knew Sarah Martinez before she became Elena Kozlova. Phoenix's eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. I remember who I was, Commander. The problem is that I also remember who I've had to become. Elena Kozlova has done things that Sarah Martinez never could have done. She's made compromises, formed relationships, earned trust through violence and betrayal. How do you separate that from who you really are? The question struck at the heart of what made Phoenix Martinez such an exceptional operator. Her ability to fully inhabit her cover identity had made her mission possible, but it had also made her psychological survival questionable. Chen stood up and walked around the bar to stand beside Phoenix. You separate it by remembering that everything Elena did was in service of something bigger. Every compromise, every violent act, every betrayal was done to save lives. That doesn't make it easy, but it makes it bearable. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. We've all done things in combat that civilian morality would condemn. The difference is that we did them for the right reasons, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Elena Kozlova is just another type of combat, fought with different weapons. The support from her fellow veterans seemed to provide Phoenix with something she had been missing during her 3 years of isolation. For the first time since revealing her identity, her posture relaxed slightly, and some of the hypervigilance faded from her expression. Morrison made a decision that would have significant consequences for everyone present. Phoenix, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You're not going on this next mission alone. Not officially, not in any way that could compromise your cover, but you're not going completely without support. Phoenix looked up sharply. Commander, you can't. Any connection to American personnel would get people killed. Yes, Morrison interrupted. But there are other options. Private security contractors, former special operations personnel who work in the gray areas where official military can't go. People who understand the mission and have the skills to provide support without official sanction. The suggestion was both brilliant and dangerous. If Morrison could assemble a team of former special operations personnel to provide unofficial support for Phoenix's mission, it would give her resources that Elena Kozlova could plausibly access without compromising her cover. Tank Thompson grinned for the first time that evening. Commander, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that Elena Kozlova might find herself in need of security consultants for her upcoming business ventures, Morrison replied carefully. Experienced professionals who understand the risks involved in high-stakes international transactions. The plan was risky beyond anything they had previously considered, but it offered Phoenix something she had been denied for 3 years, genuine support from people who understood both her mission and her identity. The psychological benefits alone might make the difference between success and failure. Phoenix stared at Morrison for a long moment, processing the implications of what he was offering. You understand that associating with Elena Kozlova could put all of you at risk? Her reputation isn't just cover, it's based on real actions with real consequences. People who work with her tend to end up dead or disappeared. Then, we'll just have to make sure we're better than the people we'll be working against, Rodriguez said grimly. It's not like any of us were planning on dying peacefully in our sleep anyway. The commitment from her fellow veterans seemed to break through the last of Phoenix's psychological defenses. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't facing the future alone. The isolation that had been slowly destroying her sense of self was finally broken. Morrison pulled out a phone and began making calls to contacts he hadn't spoken to in years. Within an hour, he had assembled a team of former Special Operations personnel who were willing to take contracts that officially didn't exist in support of missions they would never be able to discuss. As the evening wound down and plans began to take shape, Phoenix found herself surrounded by people who understood both the weight of her mission and the cost of her sacrifice. For the first time since Elena Kozlova had been born from the wreckage of a helicopter crash, Sarah Martinez felt like she might actually survive what came next. The storm outside had passed, but, inside Murphy's bar, something new had been born. A brotherhood that transcended official channels, bound together by shared understanding of sacrifice and united in their determination to ensure that one of their own would never again face the darkness alone. When Phoenix finally stood to leave, pulling her hood back up to conceal her identity once more, she carried with her something she hadn't possessed in 3 years: hope. Elena Kozlova might have to return to a world of shadows and deception, but she would no longer be facing it without backup. The veterans of Murphy's bar had welcomed a stranger and discovered a legend. They had scoffed at the tattoo until she drew back her hood, and silence had taken even the SEAL commander. But what they discovered in that silence was something more valuable than any mission briefing or operational plan. They discovered that the bonds forged in service transcend death, deception, and even the greatest sacrifices that duty can demand. As Phoenix disappeared into the night, each veteran present understood that they had been changed by the encounter. They had been reminded that service never truly ends, that brotherhood extends beyond official recognition, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won not on battlefields but in the quiet moments when warriors choose to stand together against the darkness. The legend of Phoenix Martinez would continue, but now it would be written by people who understood that even legends need someone to watch their backs when they venture into the depths of hell to keep the rest of the world safe.